And this is taken from Luke chapter 7, verses 11 through 17. And in Luke's gospel, a very important question continues to be raised by different groups of people. For example, in chapter 5 and verse 21, the scribes and the Pharisees begin to question, asking, "Who is this man?" Talking about Jesus. 749, the guests at the table with him begin to say among themselves, "Who is this man that he even forgives sins?" Chapter 8 and verse 25, the disciples inquired, "Who then is this person that he commands even winds and water, and they obey him?" And in 9:9, the king exclaimed, "Who is this man about whom I hear such incredible things?" Now, let me say a brief word about our immediate context. Now, here is our passage right here. But early in chapter 7, verses 2 through 10, a Roman soldier, a centurion, had a servant who was close to death. And so the centurion asked Jesus to please heal his sick servant. And the Lord did that. And then after our passage in Luke chapter 8, a sinful woman is delivered from spiritual death into spiritual life by Jesus. And in our passage, 7 through 11, a widow's dead son is brought back to life. Now, interestingly, since the centurion's servant was only near death, there was hope for him. Since this sinful woman was still alive, there was hope for her. But the widow's son is dead, and it would seem there's no hope for him. But we're going to learn in our passage that the dead are not beyond the help of Jesus Christ. Now, but I want to point out how this passage is stressing the female, the woman. I want you to look at verse 12. And here, a dead man was being carried out, his mother's only son. Obviously, the word mother refers to a female. And in Greek, the noun mother is feminine. She is a feminine pronoun. Widow is another feminine noun. And her is a feminine noun, feminine pronoun. Verse 13, her feminine pronoun, her feminine pronoun, her feminine pronoun. Verse 15, last word, his mother. So in a passage of 7 verses, there are 8 references to this one woman. Why? Christ's focus is on her chiefly in this passage. Now, I want to sum up these 7 verses in one sentence. Here is the essence. Here is the bottom line of this passage. Without anyone asking, that is, without anyone asking Jesus, without anyone showing faith, because of his compassion, Jesus takes the initiative and raises back to life a widow's only son in order to answer the people's question, who is this man, Jesus? Now, our story begins in verse 11. Here is my Greek text. Here is my English translation. And I'm going to make a remark about just one word in this verse. So let's look at, it begins, kai egeneto into hexes. And it happened soon afterwards that he, Jesus, went to a town called Nain, and his disciples were traveling with him, accompanied by a considerable crowd. All right. So I want to comment on this verb right here, and it is to be translated, it happened. So here's what I want to say about it. This historical aorist records an event. Its translation, it happened, while correct, can be misleading. This event occurred not accidentally, but providentially. As a funeral procession was exiting through a city gate, Jesus and his disciples were entering the same gate at the same time. Had Jesus entered 30 minutes earlier or later, he may have missed the funeral procession, but heaven caused them to cross paths at the right place and at the right time, and for a very important reason. Heaven is just as providential in your life and mine. Now, in verse 12, the focus turns from Jesus and his disciples secondarily on the sole deceased person in this scene and primarily upon his mother, that is, the mother of the deceased. All right? So this is going to begin Hoste Engissen. Let's look at my translation here. Now, when he drew near to the gate, the town gate, Kai Idu, look, a dead man was being carried out, his mother's only son, and she was a widow, and a sizable town crowd was with her. Now, I want to comment on two words in this verse, de, right here, and Idu, right here. All right, so I'm commenting on de. This is a transitional conjunction, turning the focus away from Jesus and his disciples now to secondarily the sole deceased person present, but primarily to the mother of the deceased. Now I want to say something about this this word idu right here. It's usually translated behold, and I'm going to translate it look. Actually, idu means, it does mean look. It's a command. You're telling somebody, idu, look at that, look at this. And here's what I want to say about it. This demonstrative interjection is the writer's attempt to make the scene come alive for his readers who, like you and I, none were present. It is as if the writer was saying, look, visualize this scene with Jesus, his disciples, and a considerable crowd, verse 11, entering the city, and a sizable crowd leaving the city, verse 12. But now, surprisingly, some attention falls upon a dead man, but more attention upon his mother. And what is more, his mother is a widow. Now, this woman's going to be in a bad situation. Her husband dies. Her husband supported her. He died. Her support system, her meal ticket, her husband is gone. Now, she's going to lean on her adult son to take care of her. Her adult son would be her Social Security. But now her husband and her only son are both deceased. So she is going to be in straight circumstances for daily bread. Yeah. Now, having lost both her husband and son, this widow may think that God is on the other side of the earth. So let's go now to verse 13. Kai idon altain ha kurios. And when the Lord saw her. Now, I want you to know that the word here, this word right here, the third word, altain, should come after this word right here, hakurios, the Lord. Literally, and having seen her, the Lord. Smoother, and when the Lord saw her. Now, the very fact that the pronoun altain, her, precedes the subject, when the subject ought to be right here, it's as though Jesus is putting her first, putting her before himself. So the emphatic position of her indicates that she is the Lord's focus. All right, so I want to say something about idon. I'll do that here. I want to say something about this verb esplachniste. I'll do that here. And I want to say something about this imperative, ne klaye, and I'll do that here. All right, first of all, idon. Having earlier held her husband's funeral and now her son's, this widow may well have thought that she was out of God's sight, that he was on the other side of the earth. But the Lord saw her. Next, esplachniste, and I'm translating that. He felt compassion for her. Here's what I want to say. And she may have concluded that God had no concern for her, but actually, that he felt compassion for her was the motive for his helping her. This Greek word refers to an unusually strong passion arising from deep within a person. And now the last two words, ne klaye, right here. This prohibitive imperative, stop weeping, demands the widow's tears currently flowing down her cheeks to cease. Adult children, now why is she crying? Adult children are to bury their parents. Parents are not supposed to bury their children. Sometimes we have to do that. So this command may initially sound harsh to the hurting mother, but Jesus has real good reason for it. Now, nobody in this large funeral procession has spoken to the deceased, but that changes here in verse 14. It begins with kai pros elphone, to be translated and coming forward. Hepsato tes saru. He touched the coffin. So I want to comment on pros elphone here. I want to comment on this clause here. And I want to comment on this word right here. And he said, young man, to you I say, arise. I want to comment on soy, which is to be translated to you. All right, I want to comment now on pros elphon. Unlike the centurion who requested Jesus to heal his servant, according to chapter 7 and verse 3, nobody here asked the Lord to do anything. But this modal participle coming forward pictures Christ as taking the initiative to help. No doubt, God helps you and me many times, though unasked. Now, I want to say something about this second line. He touched the coffin. To touch a coffin containing a human corpse made one ceremonially defiled. But Jesus does not hesitate to get hands dirty with our needs and problems. He does not hesitate to take on your troubles, your trials, your difficult situation. And now I want to say something about soy. Young man, to you I say, arise. Actually, soy usually would come here after the verb lego. I say to you, but as it is, it's to you I say. So I'm commenting on soy. This recipient dative to you is in the emphatic position. This conveys the idea that of all those in two big crowds present that Jesus could have spoken to, it was to the only dead person there. Why? No one else present spoke to the deceased. What do you say to a dead man? But Jesus spoke, and this lifeless person heard him. So it will be for all dead when Jesus returns. Now, the deceased, in verse 15, obeys the command of Christ. And I want to comment on ha necros here, and I want to comment on edoken here. And my translation, and ha necros, the dead man sat up and began to talk. And Jesus, gave him, the former dead man, back to his mother. Okay, now I want to comment on ha necros, the dead man. This dead man is said to have sat up and talked. This is the figure of speech called ampliatio. It retains the old name or title for a new and changed person when the reason for the old title has ceased. Rahab the prostitute in Hebrews 11:31 is called by her old title, though she quit that profession. Here this figure stresses that Jesus enabled a man to move and speak, and a dead one at that, because the Lord brought him back to life. And now edoken, and Jesus, gave him back to his mother. In the New Testament, this word is used of giving wonderful gifts. Jesus gave an incredible gift to a widow, namely her deceased son restored to life. Now, verse 16 records the crowd's response. Here's my translation. And reverent awe seized all, so that they began praising God, exclaiming, a great prophet has been raised up. Literally, I'm going to translate, appeared among us, and God has visited his people. Now, I want to comment really just on one word, our verb agarthe, has been raised up or appeared. All right, here's my comment. In our text, this verb appears twice in two different moods. In verse 14, it occurred as the imperative agarthete, a command to the deceased, translated arise. But in this verse, the same verb is in the indicative mood, agarthe, referring to Jesus, and it is rendered appeared. The figure of speech, ontonoklausis, uses the same word in the same passage with two different meanings. Jesus made the dead man arise from death, and God had his son appear in public as, according to the people, a great prophet. And a final result is mentioned in verse 17. Here's my translation. And this report spread into all of Judea about him and into the surrounding region. And now I want to comment on these two words, periautou, translated about him. Here's the prepositional phrase. Here's my comment. A report went into went in two different directions, into all Judea and into all the surrounding region. Yet placed strategically in between these two directions is the topic of that report. It was about him, that is Jesus. This helps Luke, the author, to answer the question that so many people are asking, who is this man? Well, who but God can bring a lifeless person back into life? Okay, let's turn from exposition to application. Firstly, God cares for females as much as for males. In this passage, the focus is on a woman, not on her deceased male offspring, her son. A woman is as precious to the Creator as is a man. Secondly, the encounter between Jesus and the widow was providential, not accidental. He arrived at the city gate just as she and a funeral were exiting the gate. Heaven crossed their paths at just the right place, right time, and under the right circumstances. This same God is just as providential in our life. He is never premature nor early. He is always right on time in his working in your life and mine. Thirdly, the widow had earlier attended a funeral, that of her husband. She may well have thought that God was unaware of her, that his eyes were elsewhere. Actually, the Lord did see her, according to verse 13. Jesus' eyes had been on her ever since she was conceived in the womb, and he had never once taken his eyes off this woman. Fourthly, nobody asked Jesus to do anything. He took the initiative to act, and his motivation was his compassion over her grief. God does not always wait for us to ask him for help. Surely there have been numerous occasions when the Lord took the initiative to help us. Some of those incidents may have been when we were unaware that we needed assistance, or we were too discouraged to ask, or felt too unworthy to petition a holy God. 5, nobody asked Jesus to speak to the deceased young man. What does one say to a dead person? They can't hear us. Jesus spoke to him. The deceased heard him and responded. On Resurrection Day, according to John 5:25, an hour is coming when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live. Sixthly, Jesus ordered the dead man to arise. The Lord would not have given him this command had he not given him the ability to get up. He would have never directed any blind man to open his eyes and look without firstly making it possible for him to see. Whenever Christ issues people a command, he always provides the power so they can comply. 7, death had severed the mother's relationship with her boy. Jesus gave a great gift to this mother, namely, he restored that severed relationship with her living son. Eighthly, the common people correctly interpreted what they saw. God had visited their city. What is man? What is man's son that you visit him? That is, the Almighty visits our needy children to help them. Jesus certainly paid a visit to this deceased son and brought him back to life. Now, Jesus did not get the glory for what he did. God was honored for it. That was okay with Jesus, for he came to point folks to God. We too should not seek honor from others, but rather to direct them to God so that they honor him. 10thly, a mother's deep grief brought Christ's compassion to raise her son. Mothers exert an enormous influence on their children, even if only indirectly, or their concern is the motherly concern is the cause that prompts God or others to assist their child. You've heard the expression, the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. Is that true? Well, let's just take a glimpse at history. Briefly, some examples of motherly influence. Napoleon Bonaparte, King of France, dictator, emperor of France. His mother told him, you can be a great man. You can be a famous king. In fact, if you want to, you can conquer the world. She planted that seed in him to be a conqueror, and he attempted to conquer the world. He failed, but he conquered an enormous amount of Western Europe. General Douglas MacArthur. Now, his father was a hero in the American Civil War. In fact, his father was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor. And Douglas's mother said, your father was a great soldier, but you can be a greater soldier than he. she planted that seed in her son, and he became, according to American historians, America's greatest soldier, the greatest soldier in our history. Now, before he became a saint, Augustine was a very immoral man. He was an intellectual man, but very sinful. He lived out of wedlock with a woman. He fathered a child through her, an illegitimate child, and he was just eaten up with sensuality. His mother, Monica, prayed earnestly for her son's salvation. And when he was finally converted, she said to him, the purpose for my life on earth is now completed, to pray for your salvation. And 11 days after her son was converted, she died. John Newton, who you probably remember him as the author of the famous hymn, Amazing Grace. Now, before he became a Christian, he was really a wicked man. He was in the British Royal Navy, and he deserted on the threat of being hanged if caught. And he went to Africa and started selling human beings as slaves, and he fell so deep in sin, he himself became the slave of a woman. But he had one thing going for him, the prayers of his godly mother. She prayed for the first 8 years of his life, and then she quit. Why did she quit praying after 8 years? Because she died. But God remembered his mother's prayers, and he was wonderfully converted. And the catalyst for that was a terrible storm at sea when he thought he was going to be drowned, and he knew where he was headed, to hell. And John Newton became a famous pastor in London, and people from all over the world came to hear his sermons and to seek his advice. Chris Yuan was a student of mine at Moody Bible Institute. When I knew Chris, he was passionate for Christ, but it used to be he was passionate for sin. He lived a very immoral life, and his mother was so concerned for him and talked to him about the Lord. And one day, Chris said to his mother, "So help me, Mother, if you mention God to me one more time, you will never see or hear from me again." And he ended up selling drugs and was arrested for doing so and put in a federal penitentiary down in Georgia. Now, you may have seen the movie, The War Room. This War Room that movie comes from Christopher's mother. She went into a small room in her home, cleaned it out, and devoted that room to praying earnestly for her son's salvation, put scripture verses all over the walls and other things to help her, encourage her in praying for her son. And in an amazing manner, Chris was converted in that Georgia State Penitentiary. And then he started going as a Christian. He wanted to study the Bible. And so he applied to Moody Bible Institute. And whom did he get to be a reference for him? Fellow inmates, fellow prisoners. Kathy Eccles is a wonderful former missionary. And as a young woman, her mother prayed for her safety on the mission field. And one of the petitions her mother offered constantly, the Lord, is, "Oh God, please don't let my daughter on the mission field get raped." And Kathy said, "Mother, you don't have to be so concerned about that. That's not going to happen to me." On the mission field, Kathy was kidnapped by 2 thugs. One put a pistol to her head, the other a knife at her throat, and they took her into a room and closed the door to rape her. Those 2 men got into a very heated argument with each other as to who was going to be the first to rape her. They were so angry and shouted at each other. Kathy, unnoticed, slipped out of the room, locked the door behind her so those 2 men couldn't get out, and she ran away, and she was safe. They never did rape her. And God remembered the faithful prayers of a mother and answered them. Chicago gang member's mother. Some years ago, there were 4 or 5 mothers in Chicago in profound grief and weeping uncontrollably, except one mother. She was weeping, but very calmly and peacefully. That caught the attention of the news reporter, and he asked this particular mother, "These other 4 mothers are weeping uncontrollably. You weep, yet it seems so serenely, so calmly. Why?" And she said, I'm a Christian. For years, I've been praying and asking God to get my boy out of that vicious gang he's been running with. God answered my prayers. He took my son's life and set him free from that awful gang. So, Lord, we all come from a mother. In fact, Jesus, you did. And we thank you for the mothers that you gave us. And I know, Lord, they're all flawed in various degrees. Some viewers that are listening to this video could not have had better mothers. Other viewers could not have had a worse mother. And yet, Lord, those with bad mothers, you knew in advance what they were going to be like. And you still gave those mothers to these viewers. And if you had to do it again, you'd do the same thing. You do all things well, according to Mark 7:37. And Lord, each of us owes an unpayable debt to our mothers, even for life itself. And we thank you for mothers. And Lord, I'm thinking now about mothers listening to this video, future mothers listening to this video. We ask your blessings upon them, that their influence on their children may be wholesome and holy and point them to Jesus. Thank you for our mothers. Thank you for what you have done through them for us in Jesus' name. Amen.